Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you!
Tonight's program is the story about a movie that traumatized an entire country and even claimed the lives of one of its unlucky viewers. A generation of citizens that can be sent back to that fateful night simply by uttering the words, Mr. Pipes. A demon that for many felt like a real entity haunting their nightmares for decades to come. What was only a live broadcast of a fictional movie turned into one of the biggest cases of mass hysteria in recorded human history. But it's just a movie. Ghosts aren't really real, and you're not supposed to believe everything you see on TV, now are you? So, how'd this happen? How could a film do this? And how could millions of terrified viewers be convinced of a mere 90-minute mockumentary? Well, maybe that's because the creators got exactly what they wanted. Maybe it's because they knew it would work. Or maybe it's because this keeps happening time and time again. On October 30th, 1938, the line between fictional media and reality was forever blurred when Orson Welles read War of the Worlds live on a radio broadcast. This event resulted in over 1.5 million terrified listeners and became one of the biggest cases of mass hysteria in human history. Well, I guess numbers-wise, it was the biggest at that time. People genuinely thought this was real and that aliens were attacking Earth. Crowds of frantic citizens, journalists, and a bunch of cops trying to control the chaos surrounded the New York Broadcasting Building only 32 minutes into the performance. The days after saw public outrage, the FCC almost got involved, and there was a general mistrust for CBS, the news, and especially Orson Welles. But this was the 1930s and well before the information age, and to be blunt, it was very easy to lie and convince people of things. And then you add in the fact that this was broadcasted on CBS, which is one of the biggest and most trusted news sources since its inception. Average Americans tuned into the nightly news expecting nothing but the news, just as they did every night. So with the high-level production put into the performance and no real reason to suspect anything they were hearing was fake, you could see why people took this at face value and feared for their lives. Even though now it does seem a bit ridiculous. But no way this happens again, right? Especially not after the 1930s. Well, what if I told you something very similar, if not worse, happened in the United Kingdom 54 years later to the day? In 1992, the BBC caused an even larger panic with their on-air showing of a paranormal mockumentary film. This brings us to today's video about the story of the biggest case of mass hysteria, Ghost Watch. As part of their Halloween broadcast in 1992, the BBC aired a pre-recorded mockumentary of a film crew investigating paranormal activity reported by a terrified family in northwest London, which was later released as a standalone movie by filmmaker Stephen Volk that you can now watch today on AMC Plus if you're one of the 6 people who have a subscription to that. But to set the scene before we get into the contents of the movie itself, we have to talk about one of the main perpetrators, Michael Parkinson. So Michael has a long, illustrious career in television, spanning over 45 years. He was one of the original Famous Five lineup on Good Morning Britain. He had his own talk show where he interviewed celebrities and political figures. He's hosted game shows, movie reviews. He also did radio. I mean, when it comes to media, journalism, and being a figure on TV, this guy has done it all and been everywhere. Completely random fact, but he made a deal with Paul McCartney to be on the cover of the first Wings album. But anyway, needless to say, he was a very well-respected face and voice for British media, especially for the BBC network. Now, at the time of Ghostwatch airing, I've done as much digging as I can, but all I can confirm is that there were 8.5 million potential viewers on the BBC News network the night of the incident. So on Saturday, October 31st, Halloween night in 1992, the young kids are back home with their parents after getting some candy, and as they do every night, the parents turn on the BBC One channel, the oldest and most popular channel in Great Britain. And who's there to greet them? None other than the friendly familiar face of Michael Parkinson. The program you're about to watch is a unique live investigation of the supernatural. It contains material that some viewers may find disturbing. These were the words from Parkinson himself as the movie aired on national television. A warning, yes, but nowhere is there any indication that what they are watching is fictional. He then shows us footage from the house and family that have reported the suspicious activity, and it is labeled University Research Video. We see two young sisters going to bed until one leaves to go to the bathroom. As the other is left alone in the room, loud banging followed by objects flying off the wall persists until they are screaming and begging for it to stop. The way they react and the things they say, like "don't touch me," lead us to believe this is not the first time this has happened. The terrified mother comes to rescue them, and as they all rush out of the room, the light bulb on the lamp explodes. And this is just the introduction. We're talking less than 3 minutes into the program. Right here, the creators have a decision to turn this into a found footage film, which I have to hand it to them, this is a great opening in that genre, and the viewers have a chance to turn away or assume it's fake. But if those were the case, we wouldn't be here right now. We then cut to footage outside of the home as Michael continues to narrate, letting us know multiple times that this is live. In his words, the first ever live TV ghost watch. He then doubles down and says they hope to show us irrefutable evidence that ghosts exist. Again, can you blame anyone for thinking that this was real? But to finish setting up the scene, we have two locations, the haunted house and the news studio. The news studio is Michael showing us the live feed and narrating, alongside Dr. Lynn Pascoe, his on-air expert. Then the other half is a telephone line ran by Mike Smith, who will be taking calls from viewers and other experts, some even all the way from America. Over at the house, we have Mike Smith's wife, Sarah Green, who is the lead reporter and investigator, who is teamed up with fellow reporter Craig Charles. She will be spending the night in this home with the mother Pamela and two daughters Suzanne and Kim, while he stays outside conducting interviews of the townsfolk. There's also a live audience of people outside of the house, and then of course a film crew. Now, everyone here, as you could imagine, are actors. This family is not real. The paranormal activity itself is staged. All of this is faked, except for 3 people. Michael again is playing himself, but Mike Smith and Sarah Green are also real TV personalities and at the time were actually married. They had been television and radio presenters, she had worked in shows and films herself, and while not extremely popular, they were somewhat familiar to audiences. Even worse, Sarah used to host a children's show on the BBC. There is more than established trust with the viewers. Some people grew up with her in the 80s, and most people in Britain grew up with Michael Parkinson. This isn't like other found footage films where actors play journalists and news personalities and convince you that they could be. This is like turning on CNN and having Anderson Cooper work with Bill Nye the Science Guy on a news story. We will get into this more with the aftermath, but again, the line between fiction, reality, and the concept of live television is completely blurred. Without going over a play-by-play of the movie, everything starts out with a pretty tame tone. The news studio side of things is trying to look at this very scientifically, bringing up past examples, possible theories, and in general exploring the phenomena how you would imagine so-called experts and journalists would. Then over at the house we get the family side of the story and Sarah trying to connect with the daughters, bring them some joy on Halloween night, and attempting to give them and the audience a sense of security. Don't worry, even if the ghost is here, you're not alone. But around the 15-minute mark, things start to take a scary turn, as one of the viewers calling in said she noticed a figure standing in the corner of the room from the initial recording we saw at the beginning. I do have to give the film credit as it does know how to bring out the scares early, slowly drag us deeper into the story, and heighten the tension little by little. I would imagine a lot of people watching this live empathized with the family and felt bad. The kids are completely innocent and the mom is clearly at her wit's end. But the ghost in the corner of the room and the one the youngest daughter is drawing, he goes by the name of Mr. Pipes. This is the presumed ghost that has been causing all of the usual disturbances, but as they interview the family, we find out that he has been possessing the oldest daughter, Suzanne, leaving marks on her body, causing her to act strangely, just typical exorcism activity. Mr. Pipes actually gets a full lore reveal, which creates this stronger connection to the audience. The family says that he lives under the stairs and again has taken a liking or a focus on the oldest daughter. An interview with a neighbor reveals that in this town, there used to be a baby farmer by the name of Mother Seddons. Yes, that is a real thing, look it up if you don't believe me. But it's basically getting paid to take someone's baby that doesn't want them anymore. Or I guess they can't take care of them, but yeah, they get rid of their babies and give them to these baby farmers. But she allegedly murdered some of the children and was turned into a boogeyman-like folktale by the locals, showing that this town has its own set of ghost stories and legends, which adds to the mysticism of the house and the area. Then we get a call from a probation officer that doubles down on this mystery even further. A PDF file by the name of Raymond Tunstall used to live in this house and was said to be possessed by Mother Seddons. He claims that this was the reason for his crimes and that she acted through him. So, to rid himself of this possession, he hung himself in the basement of the house the family now lives in. Hence why the family says he lives under the stairs, and unfortunately, this would make sense as to why he targets children. Another aspect I want to explore more in the next section is that these fictional hauntings from Ghostwatch are actually inspired by a real-life paranormal case from the 1970s called the Enfield Poltergeist. Famously known for being investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren and dramatized for the 2016 film The Conjuring 2. But again, more on that later. But when you show someone alleged evidence of a ghost or supernatural activity, it's hard to fully convince them that it's true. But when you give them a backstory and context as to why this is happening, it becomes easier for them to rationalize it in their head. There's a story that they can connect to, which in turn makes it feel more real. Even if the paranormal activity is not convincing enough, the scary story is actually based on a terrible reality. So the story of Mr. Pipes, Raymond Tunstall, and Mother Seddons is indicative of what the program is trying to achieve, using just enough reality and truth to expand upon it into a larger narrative. If some of it is true, that means any of it can be true. Michael Parkinson and the BBC are real and trusted, so what they say can be trusted as well. But what they do next blurs the lines even further, and again, I have to give them credit, as it was a very smart decision by the creators. At about an hour into the program, after we've connected to the story, everyone involved and the audience itself is more convinced of the supernatural based on the evidence, and most importantly, we've connected with Suzanne, the daughter who keeps getting possessed, they completely pull the rug out from under us, but somehow draw us in further. Footage from outside the house reveals that during a quote-unquote possession, Suzanne seemed to be faking some of the activity, throwing around dishes, causing the banging sounds, and overall faking her possession. She claims that this was an attempt to get rid of the camera crew, that Mr. Pipes didn't want them there, and that she had to do this or the possessions would get worse. Just as much as a little bit of reality has convinced us this is real, it has now delegitimized the first 2/3 of what we just witnessed. Or did it? See, this scene was so smart and strategic because it lets the viewer's guard down and establishes even more trust with the program. The majority of people wouldn't believe this stuff anyway, and the program is telling them, see, you were right. Because with the news, scientists, and so-called experts, they don't really play into the realm of the supernatural or fantastical. Everything is based in reality, facts, data, and concrete evidence. An actual news program might tell you about alleged supernatural activity, but the company and the personalities would simply not entertain the idea of anything but reality out of fear that it might make them look stupid or crazy or, most importantly, lose the trust of the audience. You go to the news for nothing but facts. So this scene makes the news program even more trustworthy, and what they do with that trust for the next 30 minutes is why so many people were traumatized. After this scene, the intensity is turned up to the max. Paranormal activity now happens while everyone in the house is on camera, so it's assumed to be more believable. Suzanne has a full-on possession with her voice changing and cuts all around her face. Sarah Green is terrified as she is now trapped in what seems like a real possession and even worse poltergeist activity. Then the news studio becomes more frightened, especially Mike, because Sarah is his actual wife. And what was believed to be just a hoax now seems even more real than before. The live feed then switches to what seems like a peaceful setting as Sarah sits around with the kids playing a game and everything seems to go back to normal. But Dr. Lynn Pascoe notices that this footage is from earlier in the night and is not actually live. Mr. Pipes himself has now tampered with the feed from the house. As they switch back to the outside camera crew and alert them of what is happening, everyone is rushed out of the house out of fear of what Mr. Pipes might do. But Suzanne, she is trapped in the basement. Sarah, being the kind soul that she is, she can't leave without getting her out, but she too is then trapped in the basement as the door magically slams shut behind her. Her final footage is one of the infrared cameras as it looks like she has come face to face with Mr. Pipes himself. Even though this came out before, it is very reminiscent of the end of Blair Witch Project. But total chaos now ensues. As the news studio is freaking out, their studio then becomes possessed as Mr. Pipes has infiltrated their building. Things are flying off the wall and around the room, cameras are moving and shutting down, lights are exploding, just total utter chaos. Until everything goes dark. One camera remains live as Michael tries to make sense of the situation, but something seems off with him. He wanders around in a delirious state until Mr. Pipes possesses him too. Through Michael, Mr. Pipes starts speaking directly to the audience, trying to possess all of Britain. It abruptly cuts to black, and the program is over.
At this point, it's sort of like a staple around here, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who hasn't heard of it at the very least. Whether or not they've seen it is maybe a different matter, but I think most people at this point definitely know of the name Ghostwatch just because of how infamous it's become. This thing had people losing sleep for weeks. It had people losing their lives even.
Alright, I know we just went over a lot besides the synopsis right there, but I had to show you why people believe this was real. Even for me, watching the film 30 plus years later after it was released, it's still hard to imagine myself believing this was real. Unless, of course, I was a child. So I had to figure out exactly why. But the tactics they used to create the sense of reality were enough to convince more than just children. I mean, they would believe this anyway. But after the program aired, the gravity of what they had just done really started to set in. Over 1 million phone calls came into the BBC that night, many of which were from angry parents who had to deal with their terrified children, who are now convinced Mr. Pipes was real and is going to come after them too. Even Michael Parkinson's elderly mother called in worried about her son. And if 1 million phone calls came out of a potential 8.5 million viewers, just imagine how many more cases were the same. Terrified children, angry parents, and for the citizens who already believed in the supernatural, you could only imagine that this felt very real to them too.
But the nerve that the BBC had to pull off something to that degree, I just think it shows something that I don't think modern TV would really do. Seeing the effort that went into retaining the authenticity and the genuine atmosphere that Ghostwatch wanted to build, it's easy to see how the product fooled an entire nation into believing that what they were watching was something out of this world.
But the scares go beyond just a quick thrilling night. There were long-lasting effects in all of Great Britain. 2 years after Ghostwatch premiered, the British Medical Journal published a report about two 10-year-old boys who were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder after watching this film live. Quote, the first reported cases of PTSD caused by a television program. And as the report made its way around, 4 other cases of children between the ages of 11 and 14 also showed signs of PTSD and anxiety attacks caused by Ghostwatch. And the people conducting this research were also worried about the effect it could have on the elderly. But there were no reports filed pertaining to an elderly person experiencing anything from the program, just speculation. A total of 34 complaints were filed to the Broadcasting Standards Commission, none of which were accepted, all being rejected as pretty much not their fault. Except for one that gets pretty dark. And it even made its way all the way in front of a judge. 18-year-old Martin Denham was a factory worker who lived with his mother and stepfather in Nottingham. Martin had learning disabilities and was said to have the mental age of a 13-year-old. He was one of the unlucky viewers that night who saw Ghost Watch live and couldn't discern what was real or fake. His stepfather said that he was hypnotized by the program. Quote, "He was really into it. He was just gone. I had to keep asking him if he was alright. The night the program aired, he slept with the lights on, something he had never done before. And the noises from the central heating pipes in the house, which used to be normal and nothing to look twice at, to him were now the sounds of the ghost of Mr. Pipes. This, of course, being his signature form of paranormal activity in the film. Then, tragically, 5 days after the program, Martin was found hanging from a tree near his home, confirmed to be a suicide. He left behind a note that read, 'Please don't worry. If there are a ghost, I will be a ghost, and I will be with you, always as a ghost.'" The parents were unable to sue due to a lack of financial ability to hire lawyers against such a large and powerful company. They were, however, granted a judicial review of their case, but all they got was an apology from the BCS and the BBC, and their case was dismissed. Now, while the 6 cases of PTSD and the death of Martin Denham are on the extreme side of the aftermath, the fear from those who witnessed Ghost Watch live still rings true all the way to today.
I do have family and people that I've asked around who had seen this at the time. Whether or not it was airing night or not, I would presume that it was, because I'm pretty sure it was pulled from air for the longest time afterwards. The general feeling that I tended to get from most of the people that I ask is that it was a genuinely creepy atmosphere and it was really well done. If you watched this in '92, unaware that you were being tricked, then fantastic. You were the target audience and you were played perfectly. But there is this definite fear factor there, and taking it away from whatever some millennial or Gen Z has to say about things, this was something that struck so much fear within the people of Britain at the time, and I think it has to be respected because of that. And there is some element of fear that still has to be retained because of that.
If you look on online forums, Reddit posts, or even just speaking with British citizens who grew up during this time, the effect of Ghost Watch has yet to go away. Mr. Pipes is now cemented in United Kingdom history as their own personal boogeyman, and all of this stems from one elaborate hoax. Now you might be thinking, how can someone be blamed for making a scary movie? It's art, people watch them all the time. The filmmakers can't be held responsible for how people react. And this was obviously the conclusion the courts came to in the case of Martin Denham, as tragic and saddening as that was. But this begs the question, is hoax media unethical? In the case of Ghost Watch, there was a little more nuance and some procedures that had to be taken in order for this film to even be aired. The BBC was originally very hesitant when writer and director Stephen Volk came to them with this story, and they anticipated a reaction from the viewers, however, not to the extent at which it happened. So to try and bend the ethics a little bit, they made it to where the opening credits had to have written by Stephen Volk before the program started. Now, that is still enough gray area, as it could mean the investigation and setup was written by him, or the story, or maybe he is just the one who's running this program. It doesn't explicitly say that this was a fictional story, and it's only up for a few seconds. So imagine the people that hopped in 4 or 5 minutes in. This was also aired during the usual drama slot on BBC One, so you can argue that no other shows or movies that aired during this time have to explicitly say that this is fake. It's all assumed to be dramatized fictional media. So why does this have to? And you'd be right in thinking that. But none of those other programs were made with the intent to feel real and market itself as real. All we have to go off of is the original airing of Ghost Watch, and in that 90-minute program, there was no message that said it was fictional. Afterwards, people said it was faked and apologies were issued, and in the documentary about the making of it, some people involved claimed that there were warnings and messages before it aired, but again, that is all hearsay. But also in this documentary, Stephen Volk, Sarah Green, and the other people involved, they one said they did not expect the reaction it had, but two, they seem pretty proud of it. And honestly, besides the one-off terrible cases that transpired, can you blame them? They did a really good job at the original goal, and they made a groundbreaking film.
I do get the appeal behind it. I love the legend that seems to have been built from this weird one-time event that happened in British culture. I love the legend that has built around Ghostwatch and the supernatural presence within it. I think it adds such a unique niche in British, not folklore, maybe that's not the right word, but Just it's another urban legend to add to the list of things. And I think that's where it earns most of its marks, even for newcomers today. And honestly, I genuinely do respect the hell out of it.
So I think the ethical dilemma comes down to how the creators feel about the reaction and what their initial intent was. They also have to accept the response because once you give your art to the world, it is no longer yours, it is the viewer's. I can't remember the exact quote, but the one I found online is once an artist releases their work to the public, it takes on a life of its own and is no longer solely defined by the artist's intentions or control. And personally, I'm a believer in that. But I do still believe that intentions are important when talking about the integrity of the art and the artists themselves. So from all accounts, the intent was of course to provide Halloween entertainment, but it seems to be more focused on the blending of genres and mediums. It's not just a fake news article meant solely for shock value and to prank the readers like Weekly World News, which if you haven't heard of them, there is a very good and interesting video by Papa Meat on them that I think you should watch if you want to explore this topic more. Learning about them definitely helped me shape this part of the video. But anyway, Ghostwatch changed what movies and TV could be, and I think for that reason alone, the advancements in artistic value outweigh the ethics. The War of the Worlds reading, which I previously mentioned, is brought up every time Ghostwatch is brought up as the most similar piece of media and the biggest influence to this genre of media. It changed what stories and radio could be. And sure, could Orson Welles have wanted to scare people? Maybe. But the intent was clearly for entertainment and artistic value when you see how much production was put into it. There was a whole cast of voice actors, and this was treated more as theater rather than storytelling. These actually used to be called radio dramas, and this broke that medium into the entertainment industry. Then you have something like Cannibal Holocaust, which has way more of an ethical dilemma, but it practically created the found footage genre of film, and is a major reason we have things like Ghostwatch and the Blair Witch Project. But even that film was heavily inspired by the very popular Mondo documentaries from the 1970s that do very similar things but are way more unethical than anything we've discussed today. I mean, hoax media in general has been around since back in the 1700s with A Modest Proposal written by Jonathan Swift, which is a satirical essay about how Irish people should be eating their children as a way to ease poverty. And as I'm sure you could guess, people thought he was being serious. But even satire itself has been around since people could first write things down. We have to have these things as a way to gain media literacy, and this is why these reactions happen: a lack of media literacy. Going back to the fact that this movie was based on a real paranormal case from the 1970s, and shares this story with The Conjuring 2, we see a glaring difference between these two films. One, I talk about this in my found footage video, which also goes over Ghostwatch. Highly recommend you watch this one as well, but when the found footage style came to the entertainment industry, it challenged a lot of moviegoers. The difference between found footage and The Conjuring 2, or any studio-produced film for that matter, is there's a disconnect with the audience. There's enough of a barrier between the screen and the viewer where we know what we are watching is fantastical. It's the magic of movies. Real life doesn't look like this. There's no CGI in your day-to-day, camera tricks, cinematography, a score, editing. Life is uncut and raw. So when we watch movies, we're entering a new world, an escape from reality. But found footage uses cameras that were readily available to the public. The budget is usually so low that typical aspects of film outside of directing and narrative are not present. Found footage films don't use well-known actors for the same reason. Just like life, these films are uncut and raw. It looks like real life, so that barrier is not present anymore. Then we have the based on a true story tactic of movies, which The Conjuring 2, for example, uses to enhance the movie-going experience. Now, whenever we see based on a true story at the beginning of a film, we have enough media literacy to take this with a grain of salt. At first, it made horror movies a lot scarier because these are things we wouldn't expect to possibly happen in real life, and now that idea has been planted inside our heads. But in the year 2025, we have seen this tactic used so much that we now know what it really entails. Whether it be a biopic, a horror movie, or a mystery, we know that so many creative liberties have been taken to the point where based on a true story doesn't really mean anything to us. Very rarely do films stay true enough to the source material, and more often than not, Films based on a true story are dragged through the mud for making so many changes or turning life into something made for the screen. Even The Iron Claw, which is a near perfect movie and stays very close to the truth, made changes to make the story better fit for a film-going experience. Media literacy comes into play when you are conscious of these things going in and do your own research into the story that it's based on. Same with historical dramas. These are just a way to visualize something we've only read about or possibly seen pictures of. Based on a true story is just a tactic to connect you with the story more, and filmmakers know this. The movie Fargo, directed by the Coen brothers, which is a great film either way, uses this tactic in the same way and as a marketing strategy, but is just a straight up lie. It was used as a way to test boundaries and explore new ways of storytelling. But in 1992, we still didn't have enough media literacy with based on a true story films, and we weren't even close with found footage films. The same thing happened with the Blair Witch Project 7 years later, and 12 years prior, the director of Cannibal Holocaust was actually arrested for testing these filmmaking boundaries. Then in 1938, a radio was still a new commodity to have in your household. Listening to radio broadcasts from your home wasn't even a thing until the early 1920s, and the vast majority of broadcasts up until this point were simply just the news. Radio dramas were a thing, but still a new form of entertainment to audiences. So when Orson Welles read War of the Worlds, which was on CBS nonetheless, the listeners didn't have enough experience with this sort of media. They lacked media literacy. And this comes with the territory of every new medium that's introduced and every new form of technology. We need things like Ghostwatch, War of the Worlds, found footage, radio dramas, biopics, and fake news articles like The Onion to test the boundaries of entertainment so we can then gain more experience with these forms of art and in turn create new mediums to explore new ideas. But in the world we live in, people will always take advantage of this, whether that be to sell entertainment for a profit or for something way worse. The reason I wanted to turn this video into more than just a retelling of Ghostwatch, besides the fact that my brain never shuts off and it's impossible for me to stay on topic, is while I was working on this, I kept thinking, how could people believe this? And then I thought to myself, this is just gonna happen again, if not way worse, with AI. When it comes to radio, television, films, then the internet, traditionalists always fear of what it could do, what it's capable of. For people today, the TV is just another piece of furniture that comes with every house and apartment. But when they were first coming out, the conversation was about kids seeing something too graphic, the radiation from the TV, and so many other potential problems. But this happens with every form of technology and medium. At first there's excitement, but some hesitation and concerns. We get used to it, then people take advantage of it or test boundaries, and the original worries people had came true. When you bring in something new, there are endless possibilities, most of which are good and advance us as a society, but with endless possibilities, there will be some that are negative. With live TV, I'm sure there were initial concerns of things being too graphic, misinformation, or just straight up lies. And Ghostwatch is a culmination of all those fears mixed into one single program. All of the examples of hoax media I've given are all cases where the medium was taken advantage of. And usually this leads to advancements in arts and groundbreaking media, but there will always be people who take it too far. But then we learn from it. We gain media literacy and know what to look out for in the future. This is what separates something like Ghostwatch to The Conjuring 2. Both are based on the same story, but with one we had way more experience to know how to see through the tactics. We now know found footage films are designed to look real, but aren't actually real. We know when we see an article to see if the publication is satire and fictional like The Onion and discern these publications from actual news sources. And we now know to not believe everything we see and to do our own research and critical thinking, because honestly, you can't even trust the news today because everyone has their own agenda that they are taking advantage of the medium for. But now we have artificial intelligence. A new technology that breeds endless possibilities to an extent at which we've never seen. At first there was excitement and curiosity, but as it advances at rapid speeds in the last few years, the worries are coming out of what negative side effects we will see. It will take something like a hoax that everyone believes for us to finally have ways to moderate this technology and have enough experience with it to know what's real and what's fake. Or maybe we won't, because at this point I have no idea what people are capable of with AI, and I certainly don't know what they're going to do with it. But when Ghostwatch released in 1992, it was something people had never seen before, and it was attempting to blur the lines between fiction and reality. When we look back at it 33 years later, it seems so easy to realize that it's fake. But without it, and more media like it, we wouldn't have had the experience we have now. And I believe something similar will happen with AI, except it's probably going to be way worse. We are already seeing scammers using AI against old people, deepfakes, people valuing it more than natural art, and terrible people just making terrible things. But this has happened time and time again with every medium. I really do hope that in 33 years we will be able to look at modern AI and say, how could no one see that that was fake? But that will be because of way more advanced technology that will come with a whole new set of problems. Is it still rolling? So watch out for what people start making and marketing to you. Because if millions of British citizens can be traumatized by a 90s movie, so many more will be tricked by a newer, elaborate hoax. So is hoax media really unethical? I think it just depends on how it's used. And in the case of Ghostwatch, the creation was inevitable. All we can hope is that the creators had good intentions, and the art form was the main focus.